the last thing middle school students want are chores. And so it's how can we ignite the curiosity, because the curiosity fuels the learning. So if we can ignite the curiosity, and that can come in conversations, in talking about it, in talking about things that we've read, encouraging them to share bits and pieces that they've read. There's also a lot about, I think parents can do, students, if they're reluctant readers and maybe they're just not as fluent, so they read more slowly. So they're going to be more reluctant to pick up a long book. So read this page, read this piece, let's read this together, audiobooks, whatever those things are that give it that edge of, I don't have to, this isn't drudgery. This can be fun. This can be about me. This can be about what I'm looking for. Another thing I would also really encourage parents is, like, kind of watch your students. I mean, there's a lot of times, like, we do a lot of vision, hearing, and vision screenings when students are young, but making sure we keep that up, because sometimes we'll see a reluctant reader, it's really a vision issue, or they need glasses, or it's a hearing issue, or there's some other pieces that are in play. So for parents not to overdo that, but just to, keep an eye on their students. And because sometimes as kids get older, we pay less attention to that, and they're not necessarily going to volunteer that. But I just think there's a piece for middle schoolers around choice and fun, and what do I like, and what am I interested in? And even if it's only for a moment, how do I capture that? How do I get the vocabulary going? Asking them questions that are not, you don't need to be the teacher necessarily and say, what was the main character? That's all fine. That's fine to do. But to really, like, what do you like about that? I wonder what would happen if there was a different ending. I wonder what this would be like if a woman author wrote this story instead of a man author, just different things that kind of pique that curiosity. Anything that we can do to fuel that, we capitalize on in these moments of literacy. They don't need to be long sustained times to get that spirit going.
There's a lot of digital devices competing for attention, as well as social media. So what advice do you have for parents?
For middle school students, there's a lot about them socially also that's like, I'm trying to figure out who I am. And so trying to force a middle schooler to read, or to over encourage them to read, often works against us. You're going to have those students who just naturally learn to read. But to your point, the reluctant readers, it's you got to come at it from a back door. It's really looking to say, what are the interests? If it's gaming, if it's soccer, whatever that is, like, what is that interest? Kids will often gravitate to non-fictional text over stories and some of that, especially if they're reluctant readers, because it's high interest. And so really capitalizing on that, what are those interests? What does that look like? I also think there's a lot about just thinking and talking out loud, like talking about, oh my gosh, I remember in middle school, I read blah, 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 whatever the name of the book is. And I just really enjoyed it. Not the oversell of you should read it too, but just constantly putting books, and I'm reading this book, let me read you this part, or something, a parent or an older sibling, or someone's reading on the internet about a band or something, and sharing that piece. Let me read this to you. Do you find this as interesting as I do? Engaging them in the conversation around literacy is equally important, or in many ways with middle school students, to get them involved, more important than the book or the title, or getting them through that. Encouraging them, a lot of times, middle school students in particular, they like the challenge, they like figuring it out. So it's like, if you're driving down the road and you're thinking, you know what, I wonder what the oldest building in Tucson is, then let's look that up. Like, can you find that? Google that, look for that. Like, giving them experiences in interactive spaces, media spaces, phone, computer, that they like and that they're comfortable in, but you're still pulling on the reading space, the interest, the conversation, the talking about, if they read something, or even if they're having to read it at school, it's like, man, does that remind you of any other story? Or does that remind you of the time that, we went to your Nana's house? And, making those authentic connections for students so that it is not a chore.